Good morning. It is really an honor for me to be here today. My husband and my 9-month-old son are here with me. It's our first time to Lynchburg, and so we have been enjoying it. We were hearing a little bit about your school last night, including the list of some of your speakers to Convocations before, and I have to admit, I might have preferred to know that after I was finished today. So I understand you even had a neurosurgeon here recently, so I'm going to ask everyone to just take it down a notch. Take your expectations down a notch or 10 for me here this morning. But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk with you. As I wondered about what to speak with you about this morning, I thought I would just share a little bit of my story and some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. I graduated from Wheaton College, and I remember so vividly that senior year of college and all the excitement, all the anticipation, all the well-meaning questions that we even get. I remember people saying, are you going to go for the master's? It's the new bachelor's. Are you going to get married? The biological clock is ticking. Are you going to do kingdom work or the other kind? And then there were my own ideas as well. And it sounded so cool to be in the corporate world. I wanted like the great, key card access entry into a great office. I also remember finding a job posting with the Peace Corps. They had a place in Mauritius, and I thought that sounded great. And then there were my own ideas too. Like I remember wondering, what is kingdom work and non-kingdom work? And will someone please explain the difference to me? And so as I kind of brainstormed what I was going to do next, I went online, and I remember finding, I thought it would be great to go overseas. I wanted to go overseas and work with children and learn a little bit more Spanish. And so I found this great job opportunity in Haiti, and I remember emailing back and forth with this guy. And there was an orphanage in Haiti. He said they didn't have accommodation, but there was a place that I could sleep outside and all this. And I thought, okay, this sounds fantastic. Now, I'm a middle child, and I have always been the one who's kind of tended to make my father do this, like throughout my life. I think I've terrified him really since the day I was born. So when I went to them with the good news that I was going to Haiti, I talked to this guy online, great place for me to sleep outside. He was not as excited as I was. And now I look back and I think if I had a daughter who had that idea, I'd be like, great, yeah, try again. You're not doing that. And that is pretty much what he said to me. So he was like, keep going, come up with something else. So I did end up finding an orphanage in the Dominican Republic where 2 Wheaton grads worked. And so went out there and worked for the summer. I had interviewed with Coke before I went, and Coca-Cola was my dream company to work for. That was my dream job. And I hadn't heard anything when I left, and so I went on to the DR. And actually, while I was over there, they called, and there was a job opening in Michigan, and they said, do you want it? And I said, I can't take it. I've committed to do this for the next, 8 or 10 weeks, and I can't do that. And they said, well, a second opportunity doesn't always come available with Coke. And I said, I know, and I want that job so badly, but I've got to follow through with my commitment here. And so I finished my time there, went back home, and another opportunity did come up with Coke. And so they called, and this time it was in Atlanta, which was my hometown. And so I was going to get to work for Coke in Atlanta. And yes, are there any Coke fans still here in Virginia? I'm a diehard Coke fan. So I was really excited. It was a fantastic job. I had an amazing boss. It was an incredible training experience, and I still think the world of the company and of the time that I had there. It was a good salary. They provided a company car. I got a home office and all these wonderful things. But the thing is, those perks still don't keep you from crying yourself to sleep at night if you're just really unhappy. And this was still kind of in the time you didn't have voicemail. It was answering machines. I'm not actually that old, but all this stuff has happened very quickly. And so I had an answering machine in my home office. And so my clients, I had like 1,500 accounts that I work with. They would call at all hours of the night, if they realized they'd forgotten to order their bag in the box for the Coke and they were going to need it the next day at the restaurant. So all night I'd hear the answering machine going, but they would be so angry with me. And they would just call me all kinds of names, and I would be lying there and think, no one's ever called me that before. They have never even met me. Why do they hate me so much? And that goes along with the job. Like, it is a sales job. Like, you have to have a certain kind of a tough skin. And the thing is, I didn't have it. I didn't have what it took. I could do the job. It wasn't that it was hard, but I actually wasn't sure I was going to like the person that I would turn out to be in the end, because it was really making me not enjoy being around people as much. And I think that's such an important part of life. And so I made the really difficult decision to leave that job. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. So my father had a ministry, and I thought, I never thought I would go work for the family ministry. And so I thought, okay, I'll go there temporarily and do that for a short period of time until I figure out my next step. And while I was there, the opportunity came to take an internship in D.C., and I was working for the White House under President George W. Bush in the Office of Public Liaison. And it was a fantastic experience. The Office of Public Liaison, it's called something different now, but basically it's the point of connection between the administration and the public and various constituency groups. So we would organize briefings, and these constituency groups were invited to attend, and the president would usually speak at them, and this gave them the opportunity to be heard, and then to be able to dialogue back and forth with the administration about their needs, to understand why certain decisions were made. And I loved it. I loved the intensity of the experience. I loved the long hours. I loved that no one, that someone would give me a task to do and no one would explain to me how to get it done, but they had the full expectation that I would figure it out and there was no room for error. I thrived in it. I just loved it. I remember one day, even when I was walking past our administrative assistant's desk, and she said, "I've got to go to the restroom. Can you sit here for a second for me?" And I was like, "I don't know how to work the phones. I don't think that's a good idea." And she was like, "I'll just be a minute. No one's going to call." So I was like, all right. So she leaves, and of course, as soon as she leaves, the phone rings. And I answered it, and it was Karl Rove, and he wanted to speak to someone, and I didn't know how to connect him. And so I just put him on hold, which is not the right thing to do. So a man as busy as Karl Rove doesn't have time to wait around on hold. And so he hung up on me, and I was thoroughly embarrassed and, just kind of horrified. And at the same time, I was like, Karl Rove just hung up on me. This is fantastic. So I was still excited about that and couldn't wait to tell my family what had happened. But that opportunity impacted me significantly. It gave me the chance to learn about a lot of global issues, and the one that really resonated the most was international women's and children's issues. We were having a briefing one day, and the president did not want any media allowed, so it was a closed briefing. The administration had invited and paid for 25 women from Afghanistan to come over to the U.S. for computer skills training. And they were going to be in the U.S. for several months for this training, and the idea was that when they went back home, they would have a skill that they could use in their home. And so the president was speaking to them, and as he often did, he kind of came down from the podium and walked down, and he was just basically thanking them for being there and giving them a welcome and telling them how happy he was to see them. And they did something that none of us anticipated. No one expected them to do. They threw themselves down at his feet. These 25 women threw themselves. They were kissing his shoes and thanking him. And he was visibly uncomfortable and really trying to get them to stand up and wanted to shake their hand, wanted to look them in the eye and show them the respect that they had really been long overdue. But I was standing at the back of the room and just watching this scene unfold, just seeing this response of women who had never been given opportunity or respect before, and witnessing the deep impression it made upon them just was an image that I couldn't forget. And so I knew that I wanted to work in this area. First of all, I felt as a woman, I had a responsibility to try to be a voice for other women around the world that didn't have the kind of voice that I have, that don't live in a context where they're able to speak so freely. Secondly, as a human being, I just thought I had a basic responsibility to participate in these kinds of issues. And as a Christian, I think we have an even greater opportunity, obligation, responsibility to engage with a world that is broken and deeply in need of hope. And so I began to look for jobs in that area. I had an opportunity with the Justice Department, and something about it didn't feel right. And then my father came to me and he said, we're looking at launching this new arm of the ministry. It'd be called Wellspring International. And it would be the humanitarian arm of RZIM and reach out, participate in women's and children's issues. And I said, no, thank you. I'm going to do my own thing. I still really didn't want to go and work for the family ministry. And he said, okay. And so a couple weeks later, he came back and he said, you still haven't found the job. And he said, I'll respect your decision. This is your decision to make, but this sounds like this is exactly what you want to do. You would have the chance to learn it from the ground up to help get this thing started. And so I thought about it, and I prayed about it, and I thought the only thing keeping me from this is really just kind of my sense of pride. I think when you are, the daughter or the child, and you go to work for kind of the family organization, you kind of live with this need to be proving yourself. You're afraid that everyone else is going to think that you're only there because you couldn't get another job. And I thought, okay, my pride is not enough of a reason to turn down this opportunity. So I said, okay, I'll take this. I'll help get it off the ground. I'll be there for a year. And this is 2004, so remember that. When we started Wellspring, what we wanted to do was basically serve as a bridge between donors, people who wanted to give to these kinds of needs, and organizations overseas that were working with women and children at risk. We felt there was a gap there because there are so many people who want to participate, but there's just been a growing sense of disillusionment with nonprofit organizations, and really some of that is earned, and so rightly so. And people aren't sure what happens to their money. They aren't sure who actually gets it in the end. Does the person who needs it ever see it? And so we wanted to be able to be the eyes and ears for donors. We would go do the groundwork. We would identify projects. We would do a thorough process of due diligence. We would review their records. We would make sure that the need was legitimate and that they were meeting that need with methods of integrity, and then match donors to these projects. And so my responsibility in the beginning was largely to identify these organizations and begin the due diligence process. I knew that I was going to see some tragic things. I was still shocked at just the horrible things that human beings can do to each other. We were going into areas looking at human trafficking, prostitution, domestic violence, education needs, just outstanding poverty needs. But the horrible things that people can do to each other that just never, I don't even understand how it occurs to them to think of doing these things. And so it was filled with this tragedy and sorrow. I knew that I would see pain and darkness. What I did not expect to see was beauty in some of the most unexpected places. And as I listened to the stories of others, I began to understand and actually even to accept my own. Because the interesting thing here is I don't even think I realized it at the time, but at the same time that I became really just kind of convinced that I wanted to work in these international women's and children's issues, I was also at a place in my life of really just deep sorrow. Like life had not turned out the way that it was supposed to, and there had been some severe heartache, and honestly, I didn't want the life that was mine. Like I struggled, you fight against these things that you can't change, but every morning I would wake up and I think, this is not the life that I wanted. I don't want to do this. And these things kind of converged, and I really didn't realize it. It is not that going and seeing someone else's pain made me feel better, just, to find someone who was in a worse situation. It wasn't that, but there was something about being around brokenness that kind of felt like home and felt familiar. And it got me out of my own sense of brokenness, out of my own world, and helped me look beyond that into someone else's life. The first time I went to the red light district in Amsterdam, I was overwhelmed. I had been to the red light district in Mumbai before, which is the largest red light district in Asia. There are over 70,000 women in prostitution there. Most of them have been trafficked, so they're actually behind bars. So as you walk through these dark, narrow streets, you just see these dark eyes looking at you from behind bars. And it's horrible, but there's a darkness to it. There's a seediness to it. Amsterdam, in contrast, was just like lights and glamour. It was a celebration. There were music. There were guys high-fiving. There were people laughing. And it just seems so messed up, because it's organized like a shopping mall. There's a woman behind a window. There's 400 windows that line the street, a woman behind each one, and they're organized by nationality. So if you want to see a woman from Russia, you go to this end of the street. If you want to see a woman from Nigeria, you go to this end of the street. And it was just a mall, but it was human beings that were for sale. And I felt so overwhelmed by it. And truthfully, I felt intimidated too as a woman to be there, because these women were kind of threatening to me, if I was honest. These women threatened kind of my own sense of security. They sort of represented something that kind of posed a threat to, if I had a relationship, someone that was in my life, that they posed a threat to that. That's how it made me feel. And then I got there and I just realized that none of this was some, personal affront against me, that all of these women were struggling to live with decisions that they had made, bad decisions that maybe they had made, but also decisions of things that had been done to them. All of them were simply trying to survive their own life too. And as I listened to their stories, one thing was overwhelming to me, because people often ask me if I'm talking about a girl that I met in the red light district, they'll say, well, was she in prostitution? Was she trafficked? Or is she there by choice? And if I say she's there by choice, I can visibly see this disconnect, because then we kind of feel like, okay, this really isn't as much our problem then. She's kind of gotten herself into this. But when you hear their stories, when you hear what happened, when I heard their stories, I realized instead of the things that were different about us, how similar we were. Because if the same things that happened to them had happened to me, I felt pretty sure that I would be on the same side of the window. And so as I began this work and began to understand these issues that were going on and engage with these issues and start to see my own story a little bit more, I uncovered something that I didn't expect, and that was just a beauty in the midst of a very real darkness out there. So some of the lessons that I've learned, or I've been learning along the way, the first one is this issue of kingdom work versus non-kingdom work. I don't think there is such a distinction. And I think when we kind of put those terms to it, we're creating a false distinction that doesn't really exist. As Christians, wherever we are, wherever God places us, is our place of ministry. Because ministry is about building relationships. It is about reflecting. It is about revealing the love of Christ. And we are to do that wherever we find ourselves. The fact is, you don't have to go around the world to find someone who is broken and someone who is hurting. The truth is, they're usually sitting right next to you. So wherever God calls you to, I would just encourage you to feel confident that that is your place of ministry, and you are playing a very valuable role in doing that. The second is the important factor is identifying the particularity of our calling. Where is it that God wants us to be? When I look at my path, it was really more of like a winding staircase than a direct route. And sometimes I really felt like I was floundering. But as J.R.R. Tolkien says, not all those who wander are lost. In fact, when I had the chance to write the book, that's actually probably the time when I was writing all these things down. I've never really been a journaler. It kind of scares me. I feel like things are like safer in my head. But when I had to write the book and kind of write out these stories, I actually noticed these threads that I hadn't even really recognized before. And you think, oh, what do you know? There was this plan all along. But I think that God uses our ambitions, our interests, our gifts, and even our wounds to equip us to respond to a purpose that is specific to each one of us. I was speaking recently at a Youth for Christ conference. It was to their staff. And I was saying to them, and I meant this in all seriousness, I would be more intimidated to walk into a youth rally than I am to walk into a brothel in some of these red light districts. And that's the truth. But I think what that says is that actually it speaks to the individual wiring and individual purpose that God gives each one of us. No task is less than another, but God gives you the burden and the ability to communicate in the place that He has for you. And so the task for each one of us is really to find the specificity of God's call on our life. It's to find the particularity of our calling, and in this way, every one of our lives is ultimately an individual adventure of finding our place in God's plan. I read a book a couple of years ago called The Agony and the Ecstasy. It was the biography of Michelangelo. I absolutely loved it. But there's one story in there, some dialogue back and forth that was so meaningful to me. So young Michelangelo was debating with his friends about whether the superior art was painting or sculpture. And his friends were saying that it was painting because you can portray the entire universe. You have to have the creativity and skill to create the illusion of a third dimension. You have to anticipate color and how it's going to look on a canvas. And Michelangelo actually was fighting back tears because he felt that sculpture comes closer to true form. It is three-dimensional. Doesn't art become noble to the degree to which it represents the truth, he asked. And if a painter blundered, what did he do, he said? He patched and repaired and covered over with another layer of paint. The sculptor, on the contrary, had to see within the marble the form that it held. He could not glue back broken parts. That's why there are no more sculptors, he said, because it took 1,000 times more accuracy in judgment and vision. Now, I am not one who can create art. I am one who can just appreciate it. But when I read this passage, I was really intrigued, and I wanted to understand about the art forms more to fully understand what he was saying here. And so I wrote a friend who is a painter and an amazing artist, and her words brought tears to my eyes. It is true, she said, the painter has the option to rethink, to reconsider his direction, his statement, his intensity, and his heart left on the canvas for the world to see. On the other hand, a sculptor must work with inspired insight, she explained. The vision of the end must be complete before he ever even begins. The first blows of his chisel cannot be gentle, and in their harshness, they must be accurate. There are no do-overs in sculpture, she conceded. If he errs, the marble can either become a new creation or it will remain a lifeless shard of stone, but it cannot return to what it was. It can be shaped into something new, not necessarily less than what it was before, ever different in form, but ever true to its essence. God is our master sculptor. He is concerned about the essence of who we are, the form that we have, and the masterpiece is the outcome of that essence in the capable hands of the ultimate artist. When we look back and we see the threads woven together of our career path, of our personal story filled with its setbacks and bruises, I think we will see clear demonstrations of the plan and the master sculptor at work. So how does that affect the way that we live our lives? The first thing I want to talk about is character. I think we can tend to think if we work in ministry that it might be easier in some ways because we want to believe that we treat each other differently. My friends and I often joke that it would be a great reality show, actually, to start a reality show, The Ministry, and kind of all the ins and outs that go on there. And I have a friend who also works in ministry, and she was saying that she was having a meeting recently, and someone in the meeting was saying that she'd been in the corporate world for 20 years and had left there and come into ministry. And she said, I really expected there to be a bigger difference. I expected people to be a lot nicer to each other, but there's still some of the same issues that happen in ministry that happen in the corporate world. And so someone else there said, well, it's because Christians we're still human beings. And, we still make those mistakes. And she said, I know, that's really true. And the thing is, it is true. We are human beings. We will make mistakes. We are going to fail. But shouldn't there be some kind of difference? Shouldn't people be able to see there's a difference in the way that we live our lives? We speak of the transforming power of Christ. They should see that in our life, in the way we treat each other, in the choices that we make. They should see this in the way we approach our job and the grace that we show to others. In '94, Mother Teresa was a speaker at the National Prayer Breakfast, and some of you might have heard this story, but she was actually, she either didn't get the memo or she probably did get the memo and just didn't worry about it, that you're not supposed to really talk about anything too controversial. And Mother Teresa spoke the entire time about abortion and the horror of what is going on with abortion and what we're doing. And she was very bold in what she called out to the U.S. to respond to this crisis that was going on. And a reporter afterwards said to President Clinton, well, what did you think about what Mother Teresa said? And President Clinton said this. He said, it is very difficult to argue with a life so well lived. The way we live our life is a powerful witness, even before we get to the place where we are trying to preach a sermon or trying to get to that point of converting someone. They should see a difference in the way we live. Secondly, the world knows what we are against, but do they know what we are for as Christians? Do they know that our faith is one that values the sanctity of every human life? Do they know that in the example of Jesus Christ, we have this person who was a radical in his time for his treatment, his respect of women, the way he engaged with them, the way he included them? Can we articulate, can we demonstrate what we are for? And I think that's an important way to engage with the world right now. To be able to do that, I think we have to truly understand our faith. God gave us the gift of intelligent thinking and the gift of a faith that is rational, that is truth. I think there was a time in the public square where you could just say, because of your belief in God, and that was enough of an answer for someone. But that's not true now, and society is so antagonistic toward Christianity. It requires more from us in the way that we articulate our faith, even in the way that we understand it ourselves, because the questions are fierce, whether it's social issues, whether it's understanding where God is in the presence of human suffering and these horrible things going on around the world. Wellspring is a part of RZIM, it's Naomi Zacharias International Ministries, and that's a ministry that focuses on apologetics or a defense of the Christian faith. Helping the thinker believe, helping the believer think is the line that we use. Being able to engage with people in that raw place of real living and address in a meaningful and intelligent and thoughtful way the questions from a world that is hurting and in desperate need of hope is absolutely critical. But it's not just having the answers. The way we communicate is so important to our message. My dad says, he grew up in India, and he says that there was a proverb there that said, there's no point giving someone a rose to smell if you've just cut off their nose. And I think that's so important for all of us. One of the first times I was in that red light district in Amsterdam, I was going around with a woman who works for an organization called Scarlet Cord. And they are there to be available to women working in the red light district. They build relationships with them. And if the woman makes the decision to leave, they're there to help them to leave, both with security and financial issues and that kind of thing. And as we were walking through there, one of the girls invited us in. And she opened the door and flipped off the red light and invited us to come inside. And as we talked to her, I don't have time to tell you her story. She had this tragic story of the way that she'd ended up in prostitution. And there were times where she seemed fragile and childlike, and other times where she was fierce and almost kind of frightening. She said, I dream of just, setting these men on fire and throwing them into the canal one day and drowning them. And, some of the things she was saying were kind of scary. But my friend said to her, have you ever thought about going to church? And she looked at us and she said, you tell me, If I go to one of your churches, will they see me as a prostitute or as a woman? And I didn't answer because I'm not sure I'm necessarily proud of that answer. But my friend was honest with her, and she said, well, some would see you as a prostitute, but that's not how Jesus would see you. And others would come around you and support you. And she shook her head and she said, no, the problem with your people is they tell me I should leave, but they never want to let me forget where I came from either. And I remember in that moment actually praying, like, Lord, help me never to forget that, because she's right. We do it to each other, and we do it to others as well. How we respond is important, or we end up doing more harm for the gospel than good. How does our calling impact the larger world around us? As we look at these global atrocities today, it requires a response, I think, from each one of us. But I think there's a question of how. How do we all get involved in this? The first thing I want to encourage everyone, I think it's important to stay informed. That's actually one of the things I loved about DC. There's just information all around, but understanding these issues and knowing what's going on so that you can dialogue, that you can be that voice for other people that don't have a voice of their own. A lot of times men, I think, are really interested and want to do something in the area of human trafficking, but for men, it's actually a little bit harder. A guy can't say, go do what I do and go to Amsterdam and walk into a brothel there. And so I think men are wanting to participate and they don't know how. But to men, I want to encourage each one of you, because I think you have a very, particular role in this. Because I think a man who engages in this issue, who serves as a voice for women who have been abused, who have been exploited and treated in these ways, I think you can accomplish a kind of healing in those women that other women can't do. You are giving them something else to look at. They've only known one type of man in many cases, and you can play a part in helping to restore their faith in what a man can and should be to them. There are some that are able to offer financial support. Some of you will go do internships overseas and offer your skills. But for those that stay home, these issues are not as far away from us as we think. I was on a talk show in Toronto a couple weeks ago, and the opening question to me was, what do you think of this issue of sex-selective abortion? What does it say about society? And some of you might be aware about this, but sex-selective abortion is when couples are choosing to abort a baby if it is a girl because they would prefer a son. In the country of India alone, it is estimated that there have been 20 to 30 million missing women due to sex-selective abortion already. In China, it's closer to 40 million. If this was a race or anything else, we would call it genocide, and it would be the worst genocide in history. What's happening in this area is tragic and catastrophic, and it's leading to all kinds of problems in these countries because it's throwing off the ratio of men to women. So then when men get to marrying age, there aren't enough women to marry. So they're marrying off women younger and younger. They're bride sharing. It's increasing trafficking. It's increasing rape. It's lowered the level of the economic level in the cities and in the countries themselves. This is a huge problem, and it's actually growing in North America. So the world is full of these issues that are right close to home. The issue of pornography, I want to mention. This is an issue that I feel so strongly about, and one that I think is really affecting us today. They say that over 90% of men in the church are wrestling with this. This is a significant issue, and I'm not saying that it is the same as human trafficking, but they are related, not just in a financial way, but they're related in their issues, the objectification of women, the exploitation of sexuality, of the viewer, of the woman being viewed. This is an issue that I think for us to deal with on a global scale authentically, we have to begin by dealing with it at home, within ourselves, within our church, within our community. Let me try to tell you this story quickly before wrapping up. I know all of us feel a sense of how do you engage with this? How do we fix these kinds of huge problems? And I think we really have to change our definition of success. Lindsay and I were talking about this morning. I think when we look at these things, we want to say, what's the statistic? I remember one of the first times I went to Thailand, I said, how many women that you help leave prostitution, how many of them stay out of prostitution? And he said, look, if you're asking me if it's a good financial investment, it's not. It doesn't work that way. If these were the numbers for the stock market, I wouldn't invest. You have to look at this as a human being, and every life you are able to change matters. And I genuinely feel that way. If everything we did helps one girl leave this lifestyle, leave that kind of life, then it would be worth it to me. We have to change our definitions of success. None of these things are quick fixes. We are entering a journey. That's what you are doing when you get involved in these humanitarian issues. You are entering a journey with someone else toward healing, and you're going to be there with them for the long haul. So how do we affect that? I think we have some strengths that we don't even realize. I went to Cape Town, one of my first trips to South Africa, and we went to a home for children who had been mentally challenged. This was a not easy place for me, not because the children made me uncomfortable, but because I wasn't sure what to do for them. I felt so inadequate. I was afraid of going up and overestimating their ability and so wounding something, or underestimating their ability and wounding something, and I didn't know what to do. And there was a boy in the corner. He looked like he was about 8 years old, strapped to a board. And I slipped my bag off, and I knelt down. He couldn't speak, and the woman explained to me that he'd been dropped on his head as a child by a parent who had been drunk and was paralyzed from the neck down. Couldn't communicate at all. And so I kneeled down next to him, and not knowing what else to do, I just stroked his forehead. And slowly, his eyelids just started to kind of flutter. And then slowly, these tears just started to run down his face. And I remember just sitting there. I don't even know how long it was. And finally, they told me it was time to go. And I didn't know how to get up and leave. And I even judged myself for being able to do it. And when I finally pulled my hand back, that's the first time his eyes kind of darted over and looked at me. And I felt like he was asking me why I'd stopped, why I wasn't doing that anymore. And I couldn't get his face out of my head. I cried myself to sleep that night. I cried because he was strapped to a board. I cried because I had to take my hand away from his cheek. I cried because of the overwhelming emotion of what I had witnessed. I felt like I had witnessed something powerful. It transcended language. It transcended these limitations. It was kind of a language of humanity. It was the power of the human touch and its ability to reach deep inside the soul. And God is not always there in the form that we want, in the form of an answer that we want or a cure that we seek, but he is there in that power of human touch and in the power of a caring heart that simply says, I'm sorry. Each one of us has a unique calling, a mission field, and it's made up of the people that are around us. We are a player in a larger world and community that we are a part of. Sometimes it will need an answer from us. Sometimes it will just need our grief, our compassion, our touch, and it requires wisdom to recognize the difference. But God has written your story to equip you to play a significant role. When I was little, one of my parents' favorite movies was Chariots of Fire. And I'm sure some of you have heard this story before, but it's a movie about the Scottish Olympic runner Eric Liddell, and there's a scene in there where his sister is trying to discourage him from running a race. They were in ministry together, and Eric felt called to China, and she's discouraging him from running this race. And Eric says to her, Jenny, God has made me for a purpose. He's made me for China, but he has also made me fast, and when I run, I feel his pleasure. As we recognize and understand our particular calling, when we run, we will feel his pleasure, and there we will find our purpose. So I wish you all the best in your journey towards that as I continue mine. Thank you.